Okay, let's make a start. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're here today to talk about creating the conditions for long-term investment in places. I'm Andrew Laird. I'm the Chief Executive of Mutual Ventures, and I'm joined by Maya Nesdale and David Tuck from Arcadis, my colleague Mark Mandali from Mutual Ventures, and really excited to welcome Neil Guthrie from Sunderland City Council. You're all very welcome, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. A central question that place leaders, council leaders, and other leaders in places are asking is how to increase the investability in their place. And whilst doing that, looking to reduce inequality and leverage the power of public services. So some places around the country, quite a lot, will have had some central government funding through Towns Fund, Levelling Up Fund, UK Shared Prosperity Fund. The key question is, how do you leverage those pots of funding to really create the conditions for sustained growth? And we're not talking about short-term cosmetic changes. We're talking about creating conditions to make a place really attractive for people to come and live and work, but also for investors to invest in. And we're also interested in what role public services should play in that journey as well. So this is going to be a very open conversation between the panelists. You as the viewers can submit questions using the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. This is being recorded, so there's no need to take copious notes unless you absolutely want to. I'm going to start by going to David and asking him simple question: what do we mean by investable places? And immediately after that, I'm going to ask Neil to tell us about the journey that Sunderland has been on, and then we'll open it up for a discussion. So do put your questions into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So, David, over to you. What do we mean by investable places?
Thanks, Andrew. Morning, everybody. Always great to start the week with an easy question. So appreciate that. Yeah, this discussion, Andrew, I think this started really and was triggered by the government's latest initiative, which was the list of 55 towns now bidding for funding for long-term investment plans. And I think it was when that language came out, it just triggered some thoughts in my mind about where we'd got to now. And, you know, looking at the 55 towns, it struck me that I think it's the same list that was around 25 years ago. And rather more worryingly, it's potentially the same list that'll be around in the next 25 years. So it felt to me like it was time for a recast of the narrative, you know, a rethink of some of the approach. And it reminded me of back in 1999 when the Urban Task Force was set up, which was the start of a kind of reset on thinking around these issues. So, and we can't escape the fact that it's the experience of many places in the UK that are still in what you might call a post-industrial transition, still trying to reinvent, still trying to wrestle with fundamental vulnerabilities. And while some of the regional cities in the UK have actually fared pretty well and have gone through a journey which has now arrived at a sort of clear redefinition to where they're going, for many of the sub-regional towns, there's still an exercise of sort of grant chasing and short-termism. And I think that's the territory we need to worry about, actually, because if I've learned nothing else in 35 years in this field, urban regeneration takes time. And I'm sure when Neil talks about Sunderland, he'll reflect on the fact that it's probably 15 or 16 years ago that I was writing the economic master plan for Sunderland. And it's only now that we're starting to see some real outcomes from that. So I think we should worry about the sticking plaster of government approaches to date as to whether that's actually getting us anywhere nearer towards competitive outcomes. But I think we should also reflect on how we measure some of that. So we've had an obsession in the last 10 years or so with GDP per capita as being the principal measure of competitiveness. And I feel like that needs a bit of a challenge now, because what you find is that places are just comparing themselves with one another and competing really against sort of national and regional norms, which doesn't take us anywhere. So it led me to think about this notion of place investability as the new pivot, and whether we could find a fresh narrative which says something more about how to address the challenges and barriers that exist to making places genuinely investable. And by investability and by investors, I don't mean Standard Life coming along and buying a nicely polished office building. I mean all of the stakeholders in places, all of those that could be considered investors, whether you're a corporate investor or also just a resident or an individual within a place contemplating a family future and wanting to know that the place is investable for you for the long term. Same applies to developers who want to see a continuing supply of land, but also a flexible and positive planning system that enables more competitive outcomes. And then to businesses and operators within places that really need the reassurance that there's a long-term investable plan for that place. So it feels to me like the agenda is less about competitive places and more about how you build place reputation for investment, reputation for looking after investment, actually. So, it's one thing to invest, whether you're a householder building an extension or you are Standard Life buying an office building. You want to know that there's a long-term plan for the stewardship of that place and that there's a long-term plan for how growth will be delivered. And it's that, I think, which will really drive the agenda in the future, this notion of place investability and actually moving away from placemaking. I mean, I think placemaking feels to me like an old agenda now as well, which has tended to trigger a lot of activity in what I would call place tidying up, actually, rather than placemaking. A lot of focus on physical change, and sometimes very modest improvements, a focus on that rather than thinking through what are the barriers to change here? What are the barriers to competitiveness? And I was struck very recently by news reports of places like Retford and Tadcaster, bidding for town deal money, bidding for funds for public realm, but actually the fundamental problem is if they're not careful, they'll be underwater in the next 30 years. So, looking really clearly at what it is that's affecting long-term potential and long-term investability. So there we are. Discuss.
Thank you, David. It strikes me from what you're saying there that what you're arguing for is exactly right, but really difficult in the current environment of social media and quick wins needed in the political cycle and the changeability of everything. It really will take some exceptional local leadership to have the ability to start this long-term project that you might not be around to see the results of. And there's really something there, isn't it?
I think the long-term kind of political stability of places is an absolute fundamental, because if that's not in place and you haven't got strong, clear civic leadership, it's very difficult to see the motivation for investment if there's a risk around its future stewardship.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Neil, I'm going to bring you in now. Thanks, David.
Yeah, I'll just share my screen.
I should say while you're doing that, Neil, I was telling you the other day I was up in Sunderland for the Cooperative Council's Innovation Network conference in your amazing council building, and just I know firsthand there's some amazing things going on in Sunderland. The place is looking very exciting.
I think we certainly recognise the world that David spoke about there. Endless competition, short-termism, siloed funding programs, and we're really trying as a city to make a step away from that. We're trying to influence government and our partners to take a much longer-term view, and I think this concept of investable places where people commit for the long term is really important, particularly for a city like ours that's suffered from quite a lot of decline and deprivation, particularly over the last 30 or 40 years with the failure of industry. Just touching on that, Sunderland is a city of around about 300,000. Annually, our population is in decline. We've got an aging population, and over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen obviously like a lot of towns and cities of similar nature to us, the decline of the city centre. It no longer acts as an economic motor. We've seen suburbanisation of the housing offer, and generally decline across the city centre economy. So that has led to deprivation, poor health outcomes, poor educational attainment, and I think we've really started to acknowledge that and look at a long-term strategy of how we tackle that and how we reinvigorate our place, who we need to support us on that journey, and most importantly, how we go about delivery. I think for at least the last 10, 15 years, we've been a city of failed master plans. I think we've had a long-term vision which has been fairly consistent, which has been around economic growth of the city centre, but we've had far too many pipe dreams. A lot of those blocked by probably lack of funding, a lack of that sort of leadership and focus that again David mentioned in his few words. Back in sort of 2019, we launched our city plan that really documents our social and economic regeneration strategy and really underpins everything that we're trying to achieve in terms of long-term regeneration of the city. Three key themes within that. One is creating a more dynamic city, so a city that can react to the market, can attract investment, to deliver on wants and needs of people in the community now. And obviously we've seen over the last few years through the likes of the COVID pandemic and changing macroeconomics that we need to be able to shift our plans and our momentum to reflect what's going on in the wider world. Healthy city. At the moment, there is a huge dependence on the state. Council services are under massive pressure. We need to really drive more independence. The way people live, the way people look after themselves. Just making sure the right support services are there, but people, take on board that stewardship piece that was mentioned in the earlier conversation. Also creating a more vibrant city. If there's nothing to do, if there's no jobs, if there isn't quality housing, then people won't come. There's very much a social side to bringing footfall back into the city centre. So we're really looking at how we drive that forward. So I talked about master plans and the failures that we've seen in the past. I think we've tried to take a much longer term view on how we take particularly the city centre forward. So the image on the screen is Riverside.
Neil, apologies, sorry, someone's just asking me here. I wasn't sure if you thought you were sharing your slides at the minute, but they're up. Sorry, I just thought you were doing your intro bit and you'd share the slides in a second. If you think you're sharing your slides, you're not yet. That's it.
Yeah. Right, sorry about that. Yeah.
So if you go to full screen.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So this is the Riverside Sunderland Master Plan. Really a 15, 20-year regeneration drive, all about bringing better jobs, better housing, and more activity back into the city centre. Really starting to activate the place and drive investment. And I think it's a core focus. We're not sporadic. We've very much got a tight red line, and we're trying to drive concerted investment into that location. We've had the benefit of Future High Streets Fund, Levelling Up Fund, and they're all focused on one core regeneration area, and that will then hopefully drive organic growth into other areas of the city. One of the key ambitions for us is to create more and better jobs. I think we've seen suburbanisation and the growth of out-of-town sort of business parks. We need to bring that employment back to the city centre, create investment in the city centre economy. And I think we're seeing changing trends, particularly in the office market, that people want to be in city centres. They want to be around good quality public realm and open space. And people want their employers to have access to sort of good quality housing, but also city centre services. So as well as building our own new city hall, which allowed us to move away from the much aligned civic centre. As part of that deal, we managed to hook a speculative investment from Legal & General, which is delivering 150,000 square foot of high quality office space, which they've already got something in the region of 37,000 square foot let. They're highly sustainable buildings, create a good working environment, and we're managing to attract business and investment to the city centre on the back of that. We've also created an office market where we've got different price points. So across the city centre office portfolio, particularly the new and refurbished development that we've seen come on stream recently, we can deliver high quality space anywhere between £16 to £28 a square foot, which offers diversity and opportunity. So we're not just aiming for big business or supporting the smaller entrepreneurs. We've got an offer that will support everybody. So just a slight delay on this next slide, it's coming. And then we're also looking to deliver more and better housing. So I think our city centre suffers from an over predominance of social housing. There isn't a choice, particularly for young people who want to come and live in the city centre, which means the city centre population is generally ageing. There isn't the spend or people of working age in the city centre, and we need to reverse that. To do that, we need to deliver high quality communities that support the ambition of our younger people. We recognise that our university is growing. There's high demand for labour within the NHS, and they need a certain type of accommodation. So we're trying to deliver residential schemes and portfolios that reflects that demand. Closely is aligned with the employment space, but really starts to bring more affluent people into the city centre and balances the tenure offer, and like I say, increases choice. We're also delivering critical infrastructure. I think it's all right providing real estate, creating jobs. We need the infrastructure that services that. We're focusing heavily on sort of active travel, active transport, increasing sustainability. We've recently invested with Network Rail in Sunderland Station. It was a horrific arrival point to the city and has been for many years. Not good for investors, visitors. If you talk about creating an investable place, having a strong arrival point is really important. We're then looking at delivering high quality public realm. I think on the back of COVID, I think people appreciate the outdoor space more. So when I talk about Riverside Sunderland, it's really a regeneration area that sits within a huge riverside park, and making that park accessible and having that long-term sort of management, maintenance, stewardship plan is really important. So it remains the sort of heart of community life. We're then delivering the New Weir footbridge. I think this has been seen as a massive sort of incentive for investors and developers. It connects the sort of northern neighbourhoods of the city with the city centre, takes away the footfall from sort of hostile dual carriageways and onto a dedicated pedestrian come cycling bridge. And it really starts to unlock development value. I think we have a lot of industrial land on the northern side of the river. And up until probably 18 months ago, we couldn't get the development market to go anywhere near it. But by investing in infrastructure and creating better connectivity, I think we're seeing a lot more interest and appetite. I think it's important to stress that it isn't all just about real estate. I talked earlier about having a social and economic regeneration plan. I think the social side of that is really important. I think I touched earlier on educational attainment. We do have huge talent drift from the city, and we want to retain that talent. We have good people coming through our schools, our colleges, our university. So through initiatives like HICSA, which is our Housing Innovation Construction Skills Academy, we're trying to create opportunities for people to be employed, to learn new skills and drive innovation in Sunderland and not have to move away. We're trying to work with young people so that they're bought into the vision. They have every opportunity coming through their early years to be involved in the growth of the city. We've still got issues with crime, antisocial behaviour, and there still are large pockets of deprivation. And we need a lot of multi-agency working to address that. We're trying hard to increase services and the support that are available to local communities and local population. There's no point bringing investors to the city and be surrounded by crime, antisocial behaviour, and things that generally seen as negatives. Then touched on a few times around stewardship, independence. So the image in the bottom right-hand corner is Kingsley Gardens, new sort of garden, orchard, allotment, really trying to educate people around healthy living, healthy lifestyles, but also to get them to engage with green space and biodiversity. Really encouraging people to take ownership of the estate and ownership of their opportunities moving forward. It's also something about creating a culture. I think Sunderland, a lot of its pride is certainly in the past around shipbuilding, coal mining. Unfortunately, those industries have now died a death. We need to create new opportunities, new things that attract people into the city, create new cultures. We've got a strong music and entertainment scene. We can utilise digital technology to really showcase our heritage, but also what the future might hold for the city and its people, and support the growth of smaller creatives. We've seen the success of places like Ousburn and Newcastle, which took heavy industrial areas and made them quite cool places to be. And I think one of our clear ambitions is that the city becomes a cool place. We're also trying to invest in our high street. I mentioned the investment we've got from the Future High Street Fund. We've seen the slow death of retail. I think we need to create a new offer, support sort of entrepreneurs and smaller, more bespoke retail offer. I think the larger department stores have all gone, and we need to backfill that space, bring back activity, articulate the high street, and make it a place where people want to be. But then one of the key factors is really driving the growth of existing and new industries. I think most people will have seen recently that there's been a significant investment in Nissan and by Nissan, and the battery gigafactories that will support the rollout of the new electric vehicles. That hasn't come without significant pain. Those discussions and negotiations have been going on for several years now. We have the first battery gigafactory in the UK that's well under construction, but Nissan's plans were always much bigger than that. They've had to compete with Nissan on a worldwide scale to get the investment in the new electric vehicles, and there's been need for a lot of collaboration both locally, regionally, and at national government level. And these investments, they really recognise the ambition of the city centre, the workforce that's available, but also the facilities and vision that can support something of the size of Nissan to invest for the long term. We've then got Crownwork Studios, which is the image in the top right. So currently got a live planning application for about 1.6 million square foot of film and media space, which would create huge opportunity for the region, a new industry. Again, it's about strong vision. I was learning from the investments of the past and what Nissan did. It's a difficult brownfield site. We have good manufacturing outputs. We have a good resource base in the northeast. There's a real opportunity to upskill the population and derive significant economic growth through these kind of investments. We've also managed to attract people like British Esports to the city. That was very much on the back of our digital ambitions and our connectivity, and that's really fundamental to their business. But we're already starting to see the fruits of that, and the additional investment that's brought, particularly around education, skills, and training. And then we need to look at long-term sustainability. Obviously, low carbon. As a city, we've got an ambition to be carbon neutral by 2040. That's a huge ambition. Delivering that again needs huge collaboration, partnership working, and we've got to ensure that our partners are on the same page and with the same ambition. So we're trying to be really selective. We want people to buy into our vision. We're not just ploughing ahead with initiatives that work for the market but don't work for us. Things need to work for everybody. I've touched a couple of times on our digital ambition. So in 2022, we were the UK's Smart City of the Year. We've got a partnership with Boldon Networks, previously BAI Communications, to deliver high-speed fibre and 5G connectivity across the city. And it's a real game changer for business, for industry, for individuals, for our local schools, our colleges, and we're competing, at a worldwide scale with what we're doing. So, BAI roll out similar smart city services in Sydney, Singapore, London, New York, and Sunderland. So we're really starting to, put ourselves on the map on a worldwide scale. Trying to drive community wealth. We need to make sure that the benefits of all this investment extends into our community and does, deliver the support and the services that people need. And I mentioned a lot about talent. We're seeing significant, growth of our universities. That our college is on a sort of fairly accelerated growth strategy. We need to attract the best students and create the best workforce we can for Sunderland and the North East. And we've got the likes of the devolution deal, which should help with that investment. But making sure that we're delivering on a regional scale. I think just touching on the image in the centre, I think that's the real story of our journey. This is actually taken from the Sunnyside regeneration, which is a complex area of the city that has a number of underlying problems, but sort of reinforces the journey we're taking around investment and regeneration. So developing a strong sense of place, creating safe neighbourhoods, providing activity, identify who we want to occupy the spaces, how we organically build the population, and then how we maintain and manage long-term stewardship and ownership. And I think the final thing I wanted to touch on, which sort of sits well with some of the messages that were mentioned at the start of the conversation, really around leadership and collaboration. I think as a city, we do benefit from strong political leadership. We've had a consistent political base for several years now. And I think the key thing is they understand local as well as national politics. I think being able to manage, the people that knock on your door on the doorstep, alongside being able to sit in front of, senior representatives, national government, and lobby what's best for your city, but also for government policy and delivery of government policy is quite important. I think we've been quite successful because, we've managed to be at the forefront of some of those conversations. We've managed to influence government. We've managed to advise around levelling up and what that should really mean. And I think on the ground, we've been able to demonstrate that we can deliver. I think that's not just, messaging that's coming from the city or from the council, but it's from, all sorts of partners and collaborators. And I think that strong leadership and direction and having a consistent and strong underlying vision has been really critical to our journey to date, and will be, as we create an investable city over the next, 20 to 30 years.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Neil. That was fantastic. I loved how you were really clear about saying you want Sunderland to be a really cool place, or I think that actually will connect with people. And I recognized in one of your slides the fire station, which is a really, really cool live music venue, which I've been to recently, and I loved the plan around the film and media space. I know from Belfast the regeneration of the Titanic Quarter to have that Titanic studio there, which was the home of Game of Thrones, that really transformed the place, and it was extremely exciting. David, do you want to come in quickly there? I want to just bring the others in as well.
Sure. Just a quick one, really. I was just listening to what Neil's described there. It's very much about a journey of a changed reputation for Sunderland.
Yeah.
And that's to me the bit that underpins investability. You know, if you're going to invest in a company, you want to invest in companies that have got reputation and they've got strong leadership. And you know, this applies equally to places.
Yeah.
So you know, great to see that that's moved on. I mean, just a final reflection. Some years ago, I said to the leadership at Sunderland, "You are a city with a university, but you're not a university city." And that's changing now. That whole notion of, you know, new venues, a new demography, a new dynamic is what that's all about.
Thank you very much. Maya, I want to bring you in now. So just a question that I've got. So we've seen the example of Sunderland, but I know that you've been looking at other places as well about what makes a place, a town, a city investable, competitive. What does that look like?
Well, I think to pick up on some of the points that made already, what's interesting around investability actually is sometimes you really do have to look back to look forward. And if we're talking about long term, we used to be able to build buildings for hundreds of years, and now we build buildings for sort of 25 turnover. And I guess the importance is understanding what's really contextually important to a place to begin with. I come from an architecture background. I'm an architect and master planner working on schemes all around the world. And where things seem to work is where, a sense of place really does exist, and you build upon it in defense of placemaking, actually, and unfortunately it has been a term that's been overused greatly up and down the country, actually across the globe. In defense of placemaking, true placemaking is really when you start to look to the future and see what is coming up ahead of you and start to design for it. We're kind of fortune tellers in our profession a little bit. What's coming up next. And what I'm talking about really is all the great things have been mentioned already around, creating places for talent, creating places for families, creating healthy places. And, to touch upon Neil's ambitions, which I think are fantastic, future gazing into what the future of technology is going to be to make our cities successful, better for our people, more sustainable, is really where it's at. We have the data. We know the technologies. We know what's coming up in 5, 10, 15 years' time. We need to really think about, challenge ourselves as designers and developers and local authorities. Are we really designing for the future? What's our strategy for future mobility? I'm not talking about scooters. I'm talking about vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. What is our strategy for that? What's our strategy for drone corridors? If we're going to be the best and most successful places, we need to start thinking about those kind of elements now, and not add them on in the future. In some of our places that we've been designing across the world, we're working on a fantastic project in Detroit, actually in Detroit, Michigan, in North America, and there you've got a really fascinating collaboration between the city of Detroit and the Ford Motor Company, but actually where they've pivoted to be calling themselves the Ford Mobility Company, because they want to be about mobility, not just vehicles. And there's been a fantastic platform of innovation being created there, which invited parties are asked to invest in the future of research into future mobility. And a whole part of Corktown in downtown Detroit, a very dilapidated, and in need of love kind of place, has really started to turn around starting to attract people that are really interested about what the future of cities will look like with these trends incoming. So it's really around future gazing, but with a really strong foot in the past and learning from that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Maya. Mark, I've got a question. Mark Bandali, I've got a question. There's a couple of questions in the chat here that are about really appreciating what's been said so far about this, not just about economic growth at pace at all costs, and about it creating or it reducing inequality. And Ian Gray, for instance, has said we promote placemaking and regeneration when it's only redevelopment tidying up. When are we going to focus on people first, what they want and need in a community, and then build the environment around it? So the role of, it's kind of that investing in place to support the health and well-being of people, and public services obviously plays a big role in that as well.
No, absolutely. I was just, that question was in my head as I was listening to the other participants. So I think it is a really interesting question around the role of public services. So local authorities, the NHS, third sector, and everyone else included that umbrella. What role do they play in supporting the sort of the inclusive economy, which is sort of critical to the health and well-being and shared prosperity of a place? I think there's a really interesting way of looking at this in terms of a partnership between, as you say, Andrew, the people and the place. And David, going back to what you were saying around at the start around these barriers to competitiveness that are actually generational and have been around, you know, in 30 years ago, and without action and effect and impact, the risk is that they will be there in the future. So I think the focus on communities that are experiencing, or wards even that are experiencing deprivation, and really understanding what those are. If we link it to the sort of competitiveness or the investable places agenda, there is a point around what are the drivers of economic inactivity, and I think health and well-being is a critical part of that. So the question for public services, how do we get to a point where we are improving health and well-being amongst our communities, but specifically around the most deprived? So that in itself is a real challenge, and one that hasn't been cracked yet. So, you know, some of the work we're doing with our clients at the moment to balance people and place and growth, it's demonstrating that sort of, if you think about health, 80% of a person's health outcomes are determined by non-health related inputs. So what that means in practice is the NHS, for example, which you would associate with improving health and well-being, it has an important part to play. But the council, for example, has significant levers around public health, education, social care, housing, and delivering libraries and leisure and so on. So there's a critical point there around how are these assets, how are these services supporting deprived communities or those experiencing barriers to services or employment to address those challenges. Now, the local authority and the NHS can do a lot of the thinking, a lot of the planning and delivery, but also places are starting to look at neighbourhoods as well and empowering them to identify and design some of the solutions to them at a very local level with a view to addressing some of these barriers. Now, there's a realism about this. Some of these are deep-seated systemic challenges, but actually at a local level, there is a really effective way of asking communities and wards, you know, what are the challenges what are these barriers, and how can we help you to help yourselves really to address some of these barriers? So almost at an organizational level, there are challenges and opportunities for public services, but also as we go down in terms of service delivery and supporting neighborhoods, there's a role at each of these levels, one would argue, to play around this to improve just the health and well-being. There are obviously, you know, things around employment, gateways to employment, making sure that they're in place, and also developing the skills required to support this growth that Maya, Neil and David have talked about. So, you know, public services have an incredibly important role in establishing the sort of foundations on which investment and growth, you know, can be built. But the other key issue for me is making sure that any growth is inclusive, adds to the social fabric and the shared prosperity of a place.
Thank you very much, Mark. David?
Yeah, just really interested in this notion of sort of the local level investor, rather than, as I said earlier on, it's not necessarily about legal in general, or that's great to have, but, you know, in many places, things like local sports facilities are seen as projects rather than investors. And there are some great examples of where, you know, local sports institutions have been able to act in a much wider civic capacity. Great example in Castleford, for example, in West Yorkshire, where Castleford Tigers are promoting, you know, training facilities for young people, not in terms of rugby, but in terms of skills development more broadly. So, you know, sometimes those kind of local, small scale organizations can be incredibly important stimuli to investment and in confidence in places, which at the end of the day is what this is about. So, you know, I get the big stuff, and the big stuff's important, and size can matter, but actually at the community level, some of those assets and organisations which tend to be thought of as projects feel to me like they should be regarded as investors, part of this frame.
No, I think that's a really good point. Neil, I want to come back to you. I want to combine a couple of the questions which have come in. Really good point, and I think this was a thread that ran through your presentation, but how this agenda needs to be not just about fast, aggressive growth, but about the growth being inclusive and sustainable. And I was just wondering if you could say just a little bit more about that, because it's pretty clear that that's what you're aiming to do. And then part B of the question is, how do you know if you're winning? How do you measure it?
I think in terms of not just going fast, I think there's a whole piece around, taking the community and stakeholders on a journey with us. We could design and deliver something that doesn't meet, people's needs. We spent a lot of time just understanding what the ambition of the population is, how that's aligned with our strategy, but also having, clear targets of what we want to do when, and making sure that that's controlled. We've got clear sort of constraints around where we go and where we intervene. And, we could just try to tackle everything everywhere, but we've really started to, set priorities. What are the priority areas for intervention? Where do we need to go? Where will the market deliver itself? Because we've got to be careful that don't just become busy fools, and equally that we don't, overdevelop. We've got to make sure that we deliver the right buildings and the right services in the right places, and identifying what goes where is really important. So, we've spent a lot of time, getting under the skin of that first. In terms of, how do we measure this? We've obviously, set, key indicators that we want to monitor, which are, both social and economic, for, population indices, house prices, employment levels, but also, health outcomes. I think we're at the infancy of the journey. How we effectively monitor those and demonstrate success, I think we're probably somewhere way away from that. We've talked about a long-term journey, and we're probably 4 or 5 years in. We can see some initial visible impact, but I think we need to monitor it over a long period of time and be able to demonstrate that that's sustained. Otherwise, it just become that sort of one-off.
Thanks, Neil. Mark, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, just what Neil said really resonated with me, just in terms of building things that work and are aligned to need. If I reflect on the work I did with several councils around Levelling Up Round 2, and specifically looking at some council estate or public estate and the challenges or the market failures associated with them, it was really clear that, in the example of a leisure and wellbeing hub, but there were other examples too, services would be delivered from a financially unsustainable building. So it was costing an awful lot because of the age. It was, it just simply wasn't fit for purpose. That then affects the offer that is delivered to the public and specifically to people who need it. It's often in the wrong place. So there's an issue around accessibility and affordability of getting there. Because of the offer, there's reduced corporate memberships. So, in terms of supporting businesses to create an offer to attract new people into the area, that was challenging. There was limited scope for integrated working. These buildings weren't necessarily in the right place to contribute to place-based regeneration priorities. And really, there was this disconnect between what was being delivered and what was needed. Hence the sort of Levelling Up Fund applications to create something new and vibrant and modern in the right space. But I do think there's a really interesting consideration around all of those factors coming together at the right time to address the needs as communities have them, really. So what Neil said really resonated with me, I think.
Thank you. Maya. I think you're on mute still.
Oh,
We almost got through. We almost got
why
through
did I
the
have
whole
to be
thing.
the one? So annoying. Anyway, sorry. I
That's
was
all right.
just saying, building on that kind of conversation that's already just happened. Long-term investability needs to equal long-term buildability, I think. And you know, not to talk myself out of a job, but you know, we should not really be thinking first about building new buildings firstly. And also we should not be thinking about building new old buildings, which I think we are in danger of doing quite a lot. You know, we really, again, looking at this kind of future casting point of view, we really should be thinking about what the future needs. We have every single person probably on this call have changed the way we approach work in the last 2 years. We are changing the way we approach learning, research, etc. We are changing the way we approach our cities and our towns. So we really need to change the way we build. We should not be building mono-use buildings. This is all, you know, if we're creating healthy, vibrant, successful places, we need to be talking about integrated use, not just mixed use. Mixed use quite often is retail and whatever is they build above. So, you know, the way that we look at the makeup of our towns and cities really needs to change. And to add, you know, kind of a case in point to that, some work we recently did around Barnsley town centre and the regeneration we did there was really looking, okay, so what are the uses that are going to be, you know, successful in this place? How do we regenerate the existing fabric of the town, but also make it modern and fit for purpose for the right in the right kind of purpose? And you know, and there, you know, creating a really vibrant marketplace for the town, which you know, fed on its existing community, plus creating places that such as like a library and community spaces that would further help that place be vibrant, but in a modern way. You know, and over a long period of time, that project is in its 10th year and it keeps on going. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Maya. David.
Yeah, it's an interesting question in the chat actually about the role of government in all of this, because there's an interesting dynamic, isn't there, a tension between whether this is a kind of bottom-up or top-down agenda, and you know, very taken with the notion of sort of place future-proofing and how that goes forward. But the reality for most places that are in that sort of post-industrial transition phase is that they're, you know, wrestling with limited resources, you know, having to deal with constrained capacity within local authorities in terms of delivery capability, etc. And I just wonder, in terms of the role of government, whether there's more that they could be doing in terms of, you know, guiding this agenda with a long-term mindset rather than you know, political imperatives to spend money. You know, what I've seen, for example, from Town Deal was a top-down proposition from government that basically said, come up with town investment plans, and we all thought, oh, this is going to get good. But actually, they turned into town spending plans, and all it was a lot of pressure on local authorities to, first of all, invent some projects, and then to somehow scurry around to be able to deliver them. And that pressure without a long-term plan seems to me to be a recipe for disaster, and certainly a recipe for a lot of waste. So I think there's a big question about the role of government in this, and if nothing else, they ought to be setting agendas which are about future-proofing, providing the kind of guidance at the local level as to what is happening, you know, at a sort of national and global level in terms of new innovations that we need to be planning for. You know, some of the things that Maya was saying about, you know, new forms of transport, which all sounds kind of a bit Star Trek-y, but the reality is that that's coming down the path very, very quickly. And things like AI, you know, how does that play into this agenda? How should we be adapting to respond to that? So there's a sense in my mind that we're not getting the role of government clear, and we're not getting that balance between bottom up and top down propositions quite right.
No, I think you're exactly right. And just as a reminder to people, I really liked your message early on about this being a reputation thing, really, and about there needing to be a plan to remove blockers and increase the draw factors. And one of the things that we've talked about before and that you've been pretty hot on is climate resilience, as in terms of removing some of the blockers. I think the point that you made to us when we were talking before this webinar was about, if a place floods all the time, you're not going to get people investing in it. So there's so many different factors, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And that rang true just watching the news of Tadcaster and Retford, both of which are, hopefully temporarily underwater, but this happens all the time.
It does.
Who's going to say I'm going to be a family investor or a business investor or a corporate investor in places that have got that fundamental vulnerability around them?
And if it has that reputation, that's important. Neil, you had your hand up, but you took it down. I don't know whether you changed your mind.
I was just going to pick up on the government point. I think
yes, please do.
Government has a really important role to play in all this. I know it's in the text. Someone referred to the original involvement with Nissan. I think a lot of these big strategic investments won't go ahead without significant involvement and investment from government. That's fact. I think it's there's a huge amount of competition to land that investment, and I think there needs to be a lot more connectivity and probably involvement at a local and regional scale. I think we've all seen through the likes of Levelling Up and Towns Fund and some of the things that in reality the decisions based on politics, and it's not really based on good understanding of what local need and requirement is. And we have terms like levelling up that no one really knows what it means. Are we really directing investment in the areas that need it most or have the most opportunity? And I think one of the things we're trying to promote at the moment is even having a sort of regional, I suppose, regeneration and investment board where government have a seat at the table so they can better understand the ambition and what people are trying to achieve. At the moment, it just feels like government doesn't really know its role, and until it starts to connect better with the regions, and some of these key cities with ambition, then it's not really going to fulfill its potential. So, collaboration is absolutely key.
Absolutely. Thank you, Neil. Mark, final question for you, and then I'll just ask if any of the panelists want to say anything. I like to let people go a few minutes early to get to their next meeting. But say you're one of the towns who's received the long-term plan for towns funding. What are some of the important first steps that you should be thinking about?
So I think there's a couple of things to consider. The first is, who should be involved. So the governance of the structures needed to have the conversation. So I think there's a really important point there about making sure that all of the place leaders, all of the organisations that we talked about today, are involved and in what capacity. I'd urge places to also consider involving communities in having a voice, and whatever structure possible, but making sure that it's not just anchor institutions or public sector organisations, that the local voice is heard. So governance, I think, is a really important point. I think there needs to be an honest conversation about the sort of placemaking or development baselines. What problems are we trying to solve? Some of them will be generational and deep-seated. Others will have sort of, come to pass in the last few years. But I think an honest, objective analysis that's agreed across partners around the challenges that are faced and what the baselines are for those. But also, I think the strengths-based model is important. What are our assets? What are our, points of difference or opportunities there? So having a think about things from that perspective as well. And ultimately establishing a cross-party or cross-organised place vision for the future, what that means, what the objectives are, and importantly, what good will look like. And recognising, I think it's been a point a couple of times, recognising that some things can be achieved in the short to medium term, and other things which are looking to address the impact of deep-seated systemic challenges will take a lot longer. So being ambitious, but also conscious of what can be achieved and when. And I think there's a helpful path there in terms of governance, establishing the current situation, and then establishing what good looks like. And from that, there's a helpful basis then to start identifying interventions or investments that can be made. But I think an inclusive, objective, but at the same time aspirational and ambitious view of what good looks like in the future is a really good first step.
Thanks, Mark. That's really helpful. Just before we wrap up, do any of the panelists have any final thoughts, quick thoughts that they want to share? Maya?
Well, just, none of this can be achieved really if we don't have a planning system that can help us achieve it as well. I think quite often we have wonderful aspirations and, and if the future is changing, then we need to think about, well, how our planning system also needs to adapt. It's a tough one though.
Yeah. David?
Andrew, I think my sort of final plea will be back to my place investability angle, which is really to say, start from the position of trying to understand the motivation of the investors, whoever they may be, whether it's a resident wanting to build a family and invest for that purpose, whether it's a business, thinking about the long term, the 30-year position of that business, will it be able to get the labor supply that it needs and the land for growth? Yeah. Or a developer that's, as Maya says, thinking about, what does the planning system look like here? Am I just entering a load of conflict, and should I therefore just put my money in the bank or in some other investment model? Yeah. Try to get a much more forensic understanding of the motivation and influences on these investors. And then I think the other thing to say is, as ever, do a few things really well rather than trying to pile stacks of stuff in that, wins some hearts and minds, but ultimately delivers very little.
Thank you very much, David. That is all we have time for. Just a final thank you to Neil, David, Maya, Mark, and to everybody watching and listening. And we'll be following up with an email which will have a link to the recording of this that please feel free to share with colleagues. And also what that email will contain is an invitation to continue the conversation with us. We would like to identify a number of places to have a continued conversation. We're very happy to offer a pro bono workshop to sit down with you, Arcadis and Mutual Ventures, just to talk through your specifics and maybe reflect on some of the things that have been talked on today, very specifically on your area. So that offer will be there. Please take us up on that, and hopefully we can continue the conversation with a number of you. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.